Hey guys, tonight we drift far from soft pillows and cozy duvets into a wasteland so dry it might just wick the moisture from your soul. You're riding with Alexander the Great, the golden-haired king of Macedon, the one who never lost a battle. But tonight, he's not fighting soldiers. He's about to challenge something far older and meaner, the Persian Desert. Picture this. Sun glaring down like a furnace lid, armor plates sizzling against skin, and your sandals practically melting into the sand. There's no shade, no breeze, just an ocean of dunes and a horizon that laughs back at you. Welcome to Gedrosia, Alexander's worst decision wearing a sun hat. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 325 BCE, and Alexander is heading home. Sort of. He's just conquered a solid chunk of the known world, from Greece all the way to India, and now, instead of taking the easy route back through friendly lands, he decides to, well, take the road less hydrated. Specifically, across the Gedrosian Desert in southern Persia. Why? Historians still argue whether this was a military test of loyalty, an ego trip, or his poetic way of saying goodbye to conquest. Some say he was trying to outdo Cyrus the Great, who supposedly lost an army here. Others think he just wanted to punish his troops for whining about turning back in India. Either way, this wasn't a detour. It was a gauntlet. Alexander isn't alone. He's got tens of thousands of men, animals, supplies, and a dangerous sense of confidence. You'd think after conquering elephants, chariots, and river battles, a bit of sand wouldn't scare him. But Gedrosia isn't just a bit of sand. It's like Mother Nature held a grudge against armies and stored it all here. The desert stretches wider than you expect, flatter than it should be, and crueler than any battlefield. There are no oases, no villages, just dry riverbeds and cruel ridges. And Alexander? He strides in like he owns the place, cloak whipping behind him, eyes scanning the emptiness as if it's just another kingdom to conquer. He organizes the march with typical Macedonian precision. Supply lines, water rations, camels, scouts, sand goggles? Not so much. SPF sunscreen made of crocodile dung? Possibly. Ancient Egyptians swore by it. You smell of sweat, dust, and ancient arrogance. The first few days are manageable. The sun scorches, yes, but the air is still. Alexander holds daily speeches, part motivational, part delusional. He rides Bucephalus's successor now, the original horse having died in India, keeping morale afloat with tales of gods and glory. You start believing you'll make it. Maybe it's just a long march. Maybe the desert respects greatness. And then the wind changes. At first it's a whisper, a shift in the direction your sweat dries. The tents flap differently. Scouts return squinting, their cloaks plastered with fine sand. One whispers a word no one wants to hear. Shamal, the desert's breath, a hot seasonal wind that sometimes escalates into something much, much worse. Still, Alexander pushes forward. There's a mountain range to the north they need to skirt, and if they wait, they'll lose precious days. The storm, he says, might pass. After all, how bad can wind be? A local guide, old as the rocks he walks on, begs the Macedonians to delay. He tells them stories of wind like knives and sand that eats camels. His voice is cracked, his hands scarred, his eyes milky from years squinting through dust. Alexander listens and nods. Then he rides on. You march. Sand grits in your teeth. The air begins to hum, low and distant. You tell yourself it's your imagination, but no, it's the land itself vibrating. A few soldiers laugh nervously, cracking jokes about Persian curses or angry gods. One guy swears he saw a shadow moving against the wind. And just like that, the storm introduces itself. Far in the distance, a faint brown smear begins to rise. You blink. It's the horizon, but taller. Then it grows, curls, and begins to churn like boiling milk tea, dark and seething. It's not approaching, it's charging. A sandstorm, several stories high, sweeping across the plain like a cavalry charge made of dust and fury. Alexander halts the column. For a second, just a second, even he hesitates. The wind strikes first. Then the noise. A howling, whistling screech like 10,000 banshees singing opera through their nostrils. And finally, sand. So much sand. It claws at your skin. It blinds. It hisses between your armor and burns your eyes. Horses rear. Camels scream. Men shout and vanish into the blur. You hold on to the person in front of you and pray they don't disappear too. Alexander is somewhere ahead, screaming orders that the wind eats instantly. His cloak is ripped from his back. He wraps a linen scarf around his face and leans forward, riding directly into the storm. Because of course he does. The sky isn't just dark, it's the color of ash stirred into fire, a burning beige. The sun, that brutal overseer, vanishes behind a curtain of airborne earth. Time unravels. Is it morning? Evening? You can't tell anymore. You're not marching now, you're stumbling, feeling your way forward through a hot, whirling soup of sand. And Alexander? He's still out front, or at least he was. Visibility drops to near zero. You might be 10 feet behind him or a mile. You can't see your own knees, much less your commander. Horses bolt. Supplies tip into the dunes. The wind doesn't gust, it punches, swirling grit into every gap between armor and skin. A commander to your left curses and yells for the army to hold formation. The reply is the storm itself, a screaming, grainy slap in the face. Columns crumble into chaos. Soldiers grip their cloaks over their mouths, using bronze shields to shield their faces, crawling when they must. The Gedrosian Desert is not a place of neat phalanxes. It is a place where pride gets flayed. Somewhere behind you, a pack camel groans and collapses, its legs buckling under the sudden weight of wind and fear. A water skin bursts open and the precious liquid disappears instantly, soaked by the dust, as if it never existed. A quirky tidbit here. Some Macedonian officers were said to smear oil on their skin to keep the sand from grinding into it, essentially turning themselves into ancient rotisserie chickens. Whether it worked or just gave the flies a feast is still up for debate. Historians argue whether these survival hacks were brilliant or absurd. Either way, nothing helps when the desert decides to inhale you. Alexander, for his part, doesn't stop. A runner later swears he saw the king dismount, shielding a collapsed soldier with his own cloak before dragging him forward by the arm. Another story claims Alexander used his sword to cut the reins of a panicked horse that was dragging its rider behind it. Were those moments real? Exaggerated? Maybe. But when no one can see 5 feet ahead, myth begins to grow like mushrooms in darkness. And still, he pushes. Why? Maybe because kings don't stop moving, or maybe because if he stopped, even for a second, his army would become a memory buried beneath 10 feet of shifting sand. The guides, those few left still conscious, keep shouting something in the local tongue. One of them climbs a ridge and disappears, only to return minutes later, pointing wildly east. A narrow pass, he says. Just a few miles. If they reach it, they can shelter until the storm weakens. Alexander reorders the army, or what's left of it. The remaining cavalry fan out, arms linked, dragging the blind and fallen between them. They move like a net, pulling half-drowned men to shore. Sand finds its way into mouths, ears, eyes. It grinds into teeth so thoroughly that you taste it days later. You pass the occasional helmet in the dunes, half-buried, ownerless. Someone steps on a bronze dagger. Another man screams as a scorpion, flushed out of hiding, scrambles up his leg. The desert has no rules. It's a living monster made of glass dust and heat. There's a joke among the troops now. At least there's no Persians. It gets a few dry chuckles, though one guy near the back mutters that the Persians wouldn't be dumb enough to march through this at all. No one corrects him. Because he's absolutely right. The pass appears suddenly, like a miracle, or a trap. It's a jagged canyon entrance, barely wide enough for a dozen men at a time. The wind howls harder here, compressed by the rock like a dragon exhaling through clenched teeth. But at least there's shape, contour, stone. You cling to the cliff wall, crawling sideways like a crab, occasionally ducking when flying debris. An entire saddlebag, someone's tunic, a goat skull, comes hurtling past. Inside, things go from loud to strange. The wind still screams, but it echoes now, bouncing between the canyon walls in eerie, high-pitched vibrations. It's like the rocks themselves are singing, a haunting, hollow chorus that makes your skin crawl. Alexander is already inside, leading the push. Sand cakes his hair and beard. His lips are cracked, eyes red. But he keeps shouting. Encouragement, mostly, though no one can hear. Still, just seeing him there, upright and furious, is enough to yank a few men from the edge of collapse. The next few hours are pure attrition. Men vomit from heat stroke. Horses collapse. Supplies, already limited, are down to desperate scraps. Yet somehow the army keeps squeezing through the pass. They lose entire units in side canyons, men wandering off and never returning. A group of mercenaries, unfamiliar with desert terrain, climb a ridge for a better view and are never seen again. Some say they fell. Others whisper about the wind dragging them away. And then it slows. Just enough to breathe. Just enough to see your hand in front of your face again. The storm doesn't end. It just pauses. Like a beast watching you, unsure whether to finish the job. You take off your scarf and gasp at the taste of air that isn't trying to kill you. The sun returns as a blood-orange smear behind the clouds. Light filters into the canyon, and you see the faces around you, smeared with grime, hollowed by dehydration, lips moving without sound. This isn't an army. It's a funeral procession in slow motion. Alexander pauses on a flat outcrop, looking back at the thin trail of survivors. His eyes narrow. He says nothing, just nods once, whether in defiance, fatigue, or guilt, you can't quite tell. He's made it through, but the desert isn't done yet. The next day doesn't begin, it just continues. There is no sunrise, no rooster crow, no cheery chirp of morning birds. The storm is still alive, grumbling now, stalking just beyond the canyon like a wolf circling its prey. The wind has softened into gritty gusts, but the sand is still in everything. Your boots, your hair, your thoughts. Alexander gives the signal to move. There's no time to rest, not really. Supplies are running dangerously low, and worse, water is nearly gone. What little was salvaged has been rationed so tightly that even the officers are sipping dust. Some try to suck moisture from wet cloth. One soldier famously gnawed on a cactus, only to end up spitting needles for an hour. Historians still debate whether these stories are real or retroactive hallucinations, but the desperation was very much a fact. The column emerges from the canyon with the precision of a parade that's been through a blender. Shields hang crooked, cloaks shredded, eyes bloodshot. Horses are limping, and the camels look offended to even be here. The desert opens up again, wider this time, emptier, crueler. The storm isn't gone. It's just biding its time. The sky above turns yellow-gray. Not the golden desert you've seen in paintings, but something duller, more tired. You walk now with the awkward shuffle of someone coated in their own sweat and regret, and then out on the horizon, you spot it. A wall of sand, towering and twisting like smoke rising from the mouth of the earth. It's not just wide, it's moving fast. Faster than any soldier. Faster than any horse. You've heard the term, run like the wind. This is the wind, and it's sprinting straight for you. A scout rides up to Alexander, breathless, screaming that the storm has changed direction. It's no longer skimming past. It's aiming straight at them. Another claims it's too big to go around. Yet another, possibly losing it, suggests they dig into the sand like turtles and wait it out. That man is politely ignored. Alexander's eyes narrow. He makes a quick calculation. Turning back would take too long. Heading into the mountains is suicide. That leaves only one option: outrun it. Now imagine that, trying to outrun a storm. Not hide, not shield, not dodge, just run. Across open desert, with tired men and thirsty animals. It sounds insane because it is insane. But this is Alexander the Great, the man who crossed the Hindu Kush, who split the enemy ranks at Gaugamela, who founded over 20 cities and still found time to be dramatic. So of course, his order is to move. Now. Fast. The army breaks into a shambling jog. Units that haven't run in months suddenly hustle. Officers bark orders that are mostly drowned by wind. The sun, if it's even up there, throws a pale light over the fleeing mass. Sand is already nipping at your heels. You don't look back. You don't want to see what's gaining. It's not just wind. It's not just dust. It's a full-blown sand tsunami, a rolling avalanche of earth. The storm hits the rear guard first. 1 second they're running. The next, they're gone, swallowed whole. A few screams pierce through the roar, but they're brief. The wind doesn't scream. It devours. You feel it chase up your spine, licking the back of your neck, filling your ears with static. Every breath tastes like powdered rock. Alexander rides hard at the front, his men spread out like a funnel behind him. Some accounts say he led from horseback. Others say he dismounted to run with the infantry, shouting encouragement, physically lifting men who fell. Whether those moments are truth or legend, they stick because they feel right. Alexander didn't just want to win. He wanted to be seen winning. Even when the enemy was the sky. And then the sandstorm really arrives. You've never heard wind this loud before. It doesn't howl, it growls, like a war drum played by giants. Your skin stings, your eyes blur. You try to squint, but the grit just slides under your eyelids like powdered glass. Your thoughts scatter. You forget which direction you're running. Everything goes brown. Not dark, just brown. A filter of panic and pulverized mountain. At this point, discipline collapses. Ranks break. Men run on instinct. Some link arms to avoid getting lost. Others just sprint blindly, hoping to hit solid rock instead of each other. And right at the worst moment, when even the storm seems bored with you, it throws one last insult. Lightning. Yes, sandstorms can generate static electricity, and on this day, it does. A brilliant white bolt cracks the sky in half, striking a rocky outcrop and sending a rain of debris tumbling. A pack mule panics, kicks its handler, and flees into the storm. Several soldiers drop flat and cover their heads, as if laying down in sand is somehow safer than being vertical. And then, silence. Not real silence, of course, just less roar. The storm lifts slightly. Visibility returns by degrees. You blink. The desert's still here. You're still here. Sort of. The storm didn't outrun you, but you didn't outrun it either. It passed through you, a natural disaster that didn't care about kings or conquests. Somewhere up front, Alexander stops his horse, turns, and surveys the wreckage. It's unclear what he sees. He doesn't speak. Maybe he's taking stock. Maybe he's stunned. Or maybe, just maybe, he's humbled. Because if this day proved anything, it's this. You can outthink generals, outfight empires, but you can't outrun a Persian sandstorm. Your mouth tastes like copper and regret. You blink, hard, trying to clear the film of grit clinging to your eyes. It doesn't help. The world still looks like it's been put through a sepia filter and dragged across a cheese grater. The storm is tapering now, but the damage is done. The Macedonian army, what remains of it, is scattered across the dunes like children's toys dumped from a sand bucket. Soldiers sit slumped against rocks, faces crusted with red dust, their expressions caught somewhere between shock and I want to sue the weather. You look around. The famed phalanx? Gone. Horses? Half dead. Water? Don't even ask. The desert has peeled back the glamour of empire and left something brittle beneath. And still, Alexander moves forward. The king staggers now more than strides. His purple cloak, once a flowing banner of royal ego, now hangs in limp tatters. He wraps his scarf tighter over his mouth, eyes squinting as if trying to see the next 10 steps instead of the next 10 years. His entourage has dwindled. Most of his commanders are somewhere behind him, maybe regrouping, maybe buried. A few loyal officers remain at his side, including Ptolemy, who would one day claim Egypt as his own kingdom. Right now, he's just trying to keep his king standing. He offers Alexander water, just a small splash from a cracked skin. Alexander refuses it, not with words, but by simply pouring it out on the sand. It's not about showmanship. Okay, maybe a little, but it's also about morale. If he drinks, others suffer. If he pours it out, everyone suffers together. Ancient historians love this moment. Arrian and Plutarch both reference it in glowing tones. Some modern scholars, however, still argue whether the event was dramatized or even invented. Real or not, the gesture becomes legend. You move again. The column reforms, more like a weary, wounded snake than an army. No one's marching anymore. They trudge. Each step feels like lifting a bag of rocks with your toes. Sand sneaks into your boots, your tunic, your thoughts. There's no rhythm now, no drums, no commands. Just survival. Someone behind you coughs, deep, ragged. You turn to see a soldier with bleeding eyes, blinded by sand. Two others help him stumble forward. One of them offers a strip of cloth soaked in spit, gently pressing it to the blind man's lids. This is how heroism looks now. Grimy, quiet, and half-conscious. An officer rides past, muttering a revised head count. It's bad. No one says the number aloud. It's the kind of math that makes empires weep. And yet, in the middle of this mess, something absurd happens. A song. Soft. Barely a whisper. Someone near the middle of the column begins humming, a Macedonian drinking tune, slow and off-key. At first, it's ridiculous, but then another joins in. And another. The notes weave through the sand-stung silence, like smoke curling around ruins. It's not beautiful. It's not even in sync. But it's something. A reminder that you're still human. That there's still a you beneath the layers of exhaustion and grit. And somewhere, probably under his breath, Alexander hums along. The storm begins to fade entirely by midday. The wind softens into a hot breeze. The sky clears enough to remind you what color blue should look like. In the distance, the promise of a ridgeline appears. Low hills, craggy outcroppings, maybe even the shadow of a wadi, a dry riverbed that might hold the memory of water. The pace picks up. Not much, but enough. You pass the first skeleton before nightfall. A camel, shriveled and sand-burnished, its skull leering from beneath a ragged saddlecloth. Nearby, a man lies curled under a bush that isn't really a bush, just a clump of dried thorns that offered zero actual shelter. No one says anything. You just keep walking. Food now becomes a question with no answer. The army had packed light. This was supposed to be a fast crossing. Rations are gone. Horses too weak to carry on are quietly killed for meat. Fires are banned, too risky with the dry wind, so the flesh is eaten raw or sun-seared on hot stones. Here's a lovely fringe fact. According to some sources, soldiers began chewing leather straps from their own sandals, hoping to extract some moisture or at least distract from hunger. It didn't work, but hey, desperate times, chewy solutions. Alexander doesn't eat either, not visibly at least. He walks now, not rides. Not out of humility, but because the terrain is too broken and the horse is too fragile. He moves beside his men, occasionally clasping a shoulder, helping lift a fallen pack, stopping to check a wound. This version of Alexander is different. Less fire, more gravity. He's still the king, still the god in the making, but the desert has carved new lines into his face, ones even ambition can't smooth. They make camp in a depression between dunes that night. No tents, just cloaks over sticks. The wind has finally died. You sleep on sand, back aching, sword still strapped to your chest. And for the first time in days, the stars come out. Bright, cold, vast. Alexander lies awake, staring up, lips moving in silent calculation. Not prayers. He was never a man of submission, but maybe promises, maybe plans, maybe regrets. The Gedrosian Desert hasn't killed him. Not yet, but it has changed him. And tomorrow? It's going to test him again. Morning drags itself across the dunes like a wounded animal. There is no fanfare, no birdsong, no dew, just more heat, more sand, and the steady trudging sound of thousands of men who now march not for glory, but for the distant rumor of survival. Your lips are cracked. Your tongue feels like cloth. The man beside you mutters that he can smell water, then immediately collapses. Hallucinations are now part of the routine, just like blisters and sand in your armpits. By noon, the Gedrosian Desert has shifted tactics. Gone is the violence of the sandstorm. Now comes the thirst, relentless, dull, creeping in like a tax collector you can't bribe. One by one, soldiers begin to falter. A man drops to his knees and refuses to get up. Another walks off course, arms outstretched like he's embracing an invisible lover. A third scoops up sand, babbling about rivers and fish. His friends tackle him gently, but there's little laughter left. It's not just the heat. It's the absence of anything else. No shade, no trees, no rocks worth sitting on. Just the blinding sun and the blank stare of the earth beneath your feet. And here's where things get ugly. The water is gone. Not low, not conserve your ration low, just gone. Even the camels look worried. Alexander gathers his officers. It's not a council of war, it's a council of dehydration. Options are laid out, none good. Some say turn back, some say split the army. Others propose riding ahead with a select group to seek help. Alexander, predictably, refuses to abandon anyone. This sounds noble, and it is, but it's also stubborn. His image depends on not just being victorious, but being seen as invincible. Leaving men behind would crack the myth. And Alexander, he is his myth. Still, cracks are forming. That afternoon, a group of mercenaries threatens to break ranks and march north toward the mountains. They've heard rumors of a stream, and honestly, they're not wrong. There are greener ridges to the north, but they're crawling with hostile tribes. Alexander intercepts them before they can fully split. He doesn't shout. He doesn't draw his sword. He simply stands before them, sunburnt, covered in dust, eyes sunken, and says, "If you leave, you die alone. If you stay, you might die beside your brothers. Choose." That might sound theatrical now, but out here, it works. They stay. Still, tension simmers. Alexander knows it. He's no stranger to mutiny. In India, his men begged to turn back after years of endless fighting. They'd tasted every climate, crossed every mountain, and now as a twisted farewell gift, they're being boiled alive in a sandpit. So Alexander changes tactics. He stops riding. He walks. And more importantly, he shares everything. He eats only when the men eat. He drinks only when they drink. And if someone collapses near him, he helps lift them. It's not about strategy anymore. It's about morale. One particularly strange moment burns itself into your memory. A soldier, half delirious, offers Alexander the last few drops from his water skin. The man clearly needs it more than the king, but Alexander, looking the man dead in the eyes, tips the skin and pours it onto the ground. Not to waste it, but to show, if you go without, so do I. The army sees this, and somehow they rally. Not dramatically. No one suddenly marches tall or shouts slogans. But the next few miles feel a little less hopeless. You lift your boots because others do. You shuffle forward not for glory, but because someone else needs to see you moving. Still, death comes quietly. By nightfall, the trail is dotted with corpses, not from wounds but from thirst. There's no blood, just stillness. Lips turned blue, eyes fixed on nothing. Alexander walks past each one without flinching. Not out of cruelty, but because if he lets himself grieve for every fallen man, he'll never keep going. That night, under another bone-dry sky, the wind changes again. This time, it's a cooler breeze. Not much, but enough to stir the camp. Then someone smells moisture. It begins as a whisper, a whiff on the air, a shift in the taste of dust. Scouts return with wide eyes. They've seen dark patches on the horizon, soil that's not bone-dry, a change in the landscape, possibly water. Now, historians debate this part a lot. Some say Alexander had intentionally aimed for an ancient riverbed, believing seasonal rains might yield water. Others think it was dumb luck, a fluke, a cosmic apology from the desert. We may never know. But here's what happens next. You march toward that dark streak of land like it's a golden throne, and just before dawn you hear it. Faint, trickle, slosh, a burbling echo that might be your own mind or salvation. A scout rushes back, shouting one word, water. The column erupts, not into cheers, but a surge. Soldiers who could barely crawl now sprint. Officers try to maintain order, but it's like herding dying bees. Packs are dropped, helmets forgotten. Men toss down weapons just to run faster. And then you see it. A spring. Shallow, muddy, beautiful. Surrounded by scattered reeds and shaded by a lone bent tree, probably older than every soldier here combined. It is the ugliest, most beautiful puddle in the world. Some men throw themselves in face first. Others cup it gently, like cradling a newborn. A few cry, quietly, like children waking from nightmares. And Alexander? He waits, watches, then steps forward and kneels, cupping a handful, but not drinking. Instead, he presses it to his brow like a blessing, then stands and moves aside, letting the next man pass. The water isn't enough for everyone, but it's enough to hope. Morning breaks over the desert with a touch of mercy. The sun still rises like a blast furnace, but the wind is still. The silence no longer feels like death. It's just quiet, like a room after a long cry. The puddle, that miracle of muck and joy, has mostly dried by now. A few clever soldiers have scraped small trenches to trap runoff, catching every last drop like it's gold dust. Bellies are not full. Thirst is not quenched. But spirits somehow have lifted. The march resumes. Limps, really. Boots shuffle across dunes worn smooth by suffering. Some men now use shields as sleds, dragging comrades too weak to walk. Others have repurposed broken spears as crutches. Horses are few, camels even fewer, and those that remain look like they've aged a decade. But the army moves, slowly. That's when the desert plays another card. Not a storm, not thirst. This time, mirages. You see it first as a shimmer, rippling light on the horizon. Then it sharpens into form. A lake, vast and glassy, surrounded by trees, palm fronds rustling, birds in the air. You blink. It doesn't go away. Men begin to whisper, "We've made it. We're saved." One guy even unslings his satchel and starts running. Alexander's voice cracks through the hush. "Hold!" But some don't. A handful break into a sprint, kicking up clouds of sand. They run faster than they have in days. You watch, breath held, hearts rising in tandem. They reach the shimmering edge and collapse. Nothing. Just hot, flat sand and disappointment crueler than death. It's not just one mirage. That day brings dozens. Pools that aren't real, trees that vanish, even a village, shimmering rooftops that blur into clouds as you get closer. The desert, it seems, is now toying with the army. Here's a strange little tidbit. Some ancient texts suggest that the soldiers began giving names to the mirages. Lake Demetrius, oasis of lies, gallows humor in full bloom. Historians still argue whether these were actual traditions or embellishments from later chroniclers, but it certainly sounds like the kind of joke a sunburnt Macedonian would make. Alexander doesn't laugh. He's grim now, focused. If the storm was a battle, this is the siege. The enemy is invisible, but just as lethal. One afternoon, the army finds tracks, human ones, fresh, clear, headed southwest. The idea of others out here is almost too much to process. Could they be scouts? Locals? Enemies? No one knows, but Alexander sends a rider to follow them. The rider doesn't return. Instead, they find his horse, riderless, bleeding from the haunches, trembling under a ridge. The tracks stop in a swirl of disturbed sand. That night, the camp is quiet again. Eyes scan the hills. No fire is lit. Stories begin to swirl of a ghost caravan, a legendary group of travelers who crossed this same desert and vanished without a trace. Some say they're cursed nomads, wandering forever. Others whisper that they found a secret oasis and chose never to return. You begin to notice strange things, a rhythmic sound like drums in the distance. Never close, never loud, always just out of reach. One soldier swears he saw figures standing on a ridge. When others rush to look, there's nothing. Just wind, just sand. Another man, delirious, begins speaking fluent Persian despite being a Greek who's never studied a word of it. When asked how he learned it, he says, "The dunes told me." The desert is no longer a place, it's a presence. Alexander tries to anchor reality. He walks among the men, tells stories of past victories, of home, of what they'll do once they reach the coast. He reminds them of Babylon, of wives and children waiting, of wine so cold it sweats on the cup. But even his words feel smaller now, as if even he knows the desert isn't listening. The army presses on. One evening, they find bones, old ones, weathered by years, maybe centuries. Whole skeletons curled under rocks, ancient beads still looped around necks. A rusted blade pokes from the sand, Persian in design. An officer mutters, "Cyrus?" It's a callback to one of the possible reasons Alexander took this route, to outdo Cyrus the Great, who supposedly lost an army here. Now it seems history has looped on itself. Was this desert always waiting for conquerors? The wind picks up again, but not a storm, just enough to whisper through your ears like someone breathing down your neck. You don't talk about it, you just keep walking. And then the strangest thing, someone laughs, loud, sudden, ragged, but real. A young soldier, half mad, points ahead. Palm trees, real ones. You squint, rub your eyes. They're not shimmering, they cast shadows. The smell hits next, damp, green, earthy, water, not a puddle, a stream. It winds through a narrow canyon, shallow but flowing, like cradled by reeds and shaded by date palms. Birds chirp overhead. You can't remember the last time you heard a bird. This time, Alexander doesn't order restraint. He steps aside, lets the men run. They plunge in like children, laughing, crying, splashing, some floating flat on their backs. One man drops to his knees, fills his helmet, and drinks it dry. Then fills it again and pours it over his own head. It's not salvation. Not yet. But it's enough to remember what hope feels like. Alexander kneels beside the water, palms pressed to the surface. He says nothing. Just lets the current run through his fingers. Behind him his army gathers, scarred, thinned, but alive. They don't cheer. They don't sing. They just breathe. The stream doesn't last forever, but for 3 blessed days, it feels like forever. The army rests. They drink. They wash. They remember what it's like to feel clean, or at least less like walking mummies wrapped in salt. You wake to the sound of water instead of wind. Birds flit through the trees, mocking the storm that tried to kill you. The desert is still just over the ridge, but here, just here, you get a taste of the world before the storm. Alexander allows his men to remove their armor. A few even find enough energy to laugh. One bakes a flatbread using camel dung as fuel. Is it gourmet? No. Is it the best thing you've ever eaten? Absolutely. But then comes the real weight. The moment when you count heads, when you realize how many are gone. The numbers are chilling. Out of the tens of thousands who entered the Gedrosian Desert, 1/3 are dead. Another large chunk is too ill or injured to go on without help. Entire units have vanished, swallowed by sand or madness. Alexander walks among them, silent. He stops at a line of helmets placed on a rise, makeshift gravestones. He kneels at one, places a smooth stone on top. No speech, no tribute, just that one stone. Then another, then another. Soon the whole army joins in. One by one, each soldier adds a pebble to the mound. No talking, just quiet, shuffling tribute. It's one of the few scenes recorded in multiple historical sources. Some say it happened like this. Others claim it's exaggerated. Historians still argue whether Alexander genuinely mourned his men or simply understood that acting like he did was essential for keeping what remained of his army intact. But let's be honest. The man may have been ambitious, brutal, and obsessed with glory. But he wasn't hollow. The desert stripped a layer off everyone, even him. When the army finally breaks camp, they're not the same. Gone is the swagger, the songs, the glint of bronze in the sun. What's left is something rawer, wiser, maybe even stronger. The next few days bring better terrain. Hills, shade, a rocky escarpment that guides them westward. Alexander uses local guides, carefully chosen this time, to lead them along goat tracks and shallow valleys. There's still danger. Raiders shadow the column. One night, arrows zip from the darkness and a dozen men fall before the attackers melt into the rocks. But compared to the storm, this feels almost manageable, like regular mortal danger. Then finally, the sea. You smell it before you see it. Salt, kelp, that strange sharp tang of distant tides. The army crests a rise, and there it is, the Macedonian coast. Pale blue water stretching out like a promise, waves lapping gently, fishing boats on the horizon. You blink hard to make sure it's not another mirage, but it's real. There's no roar of victory, just quiet awe. For many, this is the first time they've seen the ocean. For others, it's the first time they've believed in a future. Alexander descends toward the shore, arms loose at his sides. The tide touches his sandals. He closes his eyes. Maybe he's thinking of home, or Babylon, or the friends he's lost. A strange ritual follows, one that doesn't get enough attention in most history classes. Alexander orders a sacrifice, not to a god of war, but to Poseidon, god of the sea. He tosses golden goblets into the surf. Soldiers offer coins, trinkets, bits of jewelry, some their last tokens of family. It's an offering of thanks, yes, but also an apology for daring the desert, for thinking they could outrun a sandstorm, for what they've become. Here's an odd little side note. Some sources claim Alexander had seawater poured over his head in a kind of symbolic baptism. Others suggest he simply washed his hands. Either way, it marked a shift from conqueror to survivor. And not everyone survived. The bodies are buried along the coast, not in neat rows, but where the ground permits. Some get stones, others just sand. The army doesn't linger long. There are still cities to reach, supplies to restock, wounds to treat. But before they leave, Alexander does something few expected. He writes a letter. Not a typical royal dispatch, but a personal one. To Craterus, one of his senior generals who had taken a safer route with wounded soldiers and baggage. In it, Alexander admits how bad it was. He lists the losses, describes the terrain, mentions the sandstorm, and perhaps most shockingly, he doesn't exaggerate. This is the man who claimed divine heritage, who believed he was descended from Achilles and Heracles. And now he writes like a man, not a god, not a king, just a man who led his army into a storm and barely crawled out. Historians love this letter. Some say it marks a turning point in his psyche. Others argue it's a PR move. But something shifted in him out there, and you feel it in how he walks, how he speaks, how he no longer needs to dominate every conversation. The desert left him sun-scarred, hair bleached, eyes squinting harder. But it also stripped away layers of myth. And what emerged was someone slightly more mortal, slightly more human. As the army begins moving inland again, towards safety, towards cities, toward the life beyond this stretch of hell, you take one last look back at the coastline, and for the first time in weeks, you exhale without tasting sand. The coast fades behind you like a dream you're not quite sure was real. The path forward leads through settled lands, sparser villages, dusty trade posts, occasional herds of goats that don't immediately panic at the sight of men. Compared to what you've come from, this might as well be a stroll through paradise. Alexander sets the pace slower now. His officers, what's left of them, don't question it. The desert took more than lives. It took time, strength, certainty. Now, even the king treads more carefully. You pass into Carmania, a region where green valleys run like ribbons through a rocky landscape. The villages here are small, built from sun-baked mud and woven reeds. The people stare. Some offer help, dates, water, even shelter. Others retreat indoors, pulling their children with them, like the very sight of your broken army is a bad omen. Alexander doesn't blame them. He knows what they look like. And then, just when you think things might return to normal, Alexander throws a party. Yes, a party. Not a humble gathering, a parade. In full costume, with garlands and music and feasting. It seems ludicrous at first. Why celebrate after what you've just endured? Why now? But that's exactly the point. The Carmanian festival, as it would later be called, becomes a strange pivot in the journey, a kind of ritual reboot. After weeks of silence and sandstorms, suddenly there's color again. Dyed fabrics, brass horns, roasted meat, even wine. Men shave their beards, bathe, polish what armor they haven't lost. For a single day, they pretend they're the army that once marched from Macedonia, undefeated. Alexander rides in a golden chariot, not because he's vain. Well, okay, partly because he's vain, but also to remind his men of who they still are. Conquerors. Survivors. A force that just crossed the deadliest desert on the map and lived to tell the tale. There's dancing, singing, terrible singing, in fact. Macedonian drinking songs meet local flutes in a chaotic blend of joy and trauma relief. Someone tries to roast a goat with a flaming spear. Another juggles pebbles and passes out mid-performance. It's all ridiculous, and it's glorious. And yet, there's an undertone, the missing. No one says it out loud. But every third man you see is wearing a bit of cloth that once belonged to someone else. A token, a reminder. This party, for all its music, is also a memorial. After the festival, the army resumes its march with a new rhythm. Not quite lighthearted, but steadier, more united. Alexander's leadership has changed. He's no longer just commanding, he's listening. He seeks out veterans, hears their complaints, promotes soldiers based on endurance, not lineage. Some suggest this was always part of his plan, to blend Macedonian pride with Eastern resilience. But more likely, the desert simply humbled him. And humility, oddly enough, makes him stronger. He arrives at Persepolis weeks later to find it as splendid and broken as when he left it. The palace he once torched is still a smoldered skeleton. The people remember him. The Persian aristocracy, now mostly co-opted into his ranks, greet him with cautious respect. After all, he survived something that even Cyrus the Great couldn't. News of his survival spreads fast. In Babylon, rumors had already begun that the boy king had finally pushed too far, that the desert had claimed him like so many other legends. But now those stories shift. He didn't just survive. He conquered the desert, through madness maybe, or stubbornness, or sheer refusal to stop moving. Back in his private quarters, Alexander dictates letters, orders new temples, plans future campaigns. But something is different in his tone. He talks less about war, more about legacy, cities to build, trade routes to mend, a blended empire, not just a conquered one. Yet even now, there are arguments among his advisors. Some want to push west again, to Greece. Others urge consolidation. A few whisper of mutiny still. And Alexander? He listens, he considers. But he never says never to another march. And that brings us to the fringe theory, that the sandstorm, brutal as it was, didn't just challenge his army, it changed his destiny. Some scholars argue that Alexander became more spiritual after the desert, that his obsession with being divine grew from nearly dying in a place where gods refused to follow. Others believe it broke his illusion of control, that the desert taught him even he had limits. Either way, the boy who set out to tame the world now walks a little slower, sleeps less, looks further into the distance when maps are unfurled. He's not done, but he's different. And you? You still wake sometimes with sand in your teeth, even in Persepolis, even months later, because the desert stays with you, not as punishment, but as proof. You made it through. So did he. And now, as we slow to the softest part of this journey, let's take one last look back. Not at the battles, not at the kings and conquests, but at the silence that followed. The Gedrosian Desert didn't roar with armies or echo with swords. It whispered. It tested not your strength, but your ability to keep placing one foot in front of the other when every part of you begged to stop. That's what made it so fearsome. It didn't fight like men do. It didn't care who you were. General or foot soldier, Persian or Macedonian. It simply waited and watched. But in the end, Alexander endured it, not with cleverness or strategy, but with grit, with the stubborn refusal to let a sandstorm write the last chapter of his story. And now, as you lie there, eyes heavy, breathing slower, maybe you feel it too, that faint breeze across your cheek, that image of cracked earth and golden skies, maybe even the distant sound of boots crunching through dust. It's not danger anymore, just memory. Just the echo of thousands who walked before you, through impossible places, toward a horizon they could barely see. So wherever you are right now, cozy in bed, nestled on the couch, earbuds in at 3 a.m., remember that even the greatest of legends had nights like this. Nights when they weren't conquering, just enduring. And that's enough. Let your mind drift like sand in the breeze. Let the harsh sun fade into a warm glow. Let the story soften into sleep, because you've made it through the desert too. And now, you can rest.